what we call national liberation. That is, the weakening of the European powers really set a spark. The end of World War II really set a spark in what came to be known later as the Third World, for people who used to be ruled by the French and the British, to seek national liberation, freedom, independence, so on and so forth. And this also started to happen in the Middle East, and you started to have a wave of independence of different Arab countries. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, so on. And then at a fateful moment, I'm not going to go into the details, the new ideologies that a lot of these powers chose was Arab nationalism. So as I said, Arab nationalism was a growing ideology among a subset of Arab intellectuals. And all of a sudden, you had real independence. The British left. And then you had Arab states officially adopting, primarily Egypt in 1952, adopting that ideology of Arab nationalism as its official ideology. Now, Arab nationalism at that point was very revolutionary, mystical. It had a mystical sense of history and also had received a heavy input of anti-Semitism from the Germans. And this became the ideology of the first modern independent Arab states. They built mass communication, mass education devices, and then what you get a whole new Arab generation that receives this culture as their first layer of the modern understanding of the world. I'll tell you the story of my own family. So the revolution happened in Egypt in 1952. Before 1952, Egypt was ruled by a monarchy that had took it from the Ottomans. So it was still a feudal class, but then all of a sudden you get a revolution in 1952, rise of Arab nationalism and socialism and so on, national liberation, the Third World. And part of that revolution was taking large segments of the peasant population and urbanize them very quickly, give them an education so they can become factory workers and become bureaucrats and so on. My family was one of those families. My grandfather was mostly illiterate. He was a peasant from the countryside, and then he moved to Cairo in the 1950s. He worked for the state in some capacity, and then all of his children, my father included, received free education and ended up being a part of Egypt's middle class. My father was an accountant. I have an uncle who was an Air Force pilot, another one who was an engineer. So this is the fast modernization project. It's very similar to what the Soviets did, but that's exactly was the model, right? Take this backward country out of the colonial and medieval conditions, give it this ideology that can modernize it very quickly, and built it into a modern society very quickly. That was kind of the idea. The problem is that Arab nationalism had, as I said, mystical and revolutionary elements. They had a lot of anti-Semitism in it. And also there was a heavy influence of Marxism, specifically its animosity to the West, the oppressed versus oppressor worldview, and its revolutionary zeal. A lot of this was actually part of the mix with Arab nationalism. But anyways, you get all of this new people who are growing up into this as who they are. This happens at the same time that Israel was starting as a nation. So you get the fight against Zionism, or the war against Zionism to eradicate Zionism, is not just a matter of land. It's a matter of ideological conviction that this is somehow a historical saga through which the Arabs must realize themselves through the destruction of Zionism in order for them to obtain their full unity. That was how things were seen back in the 1950s. Absent from all of this, notice Islam completely. So far, I have avoided at all talking about religion, talking about Islam, because actually Islam was not part of the formula. These Arab elites were overwhelmingly atheistic. They were mostly, it was a big coalition of Arab nationalists and Arab Marxists. Now, this project fit well within the context of the Cold War. That is, Arab nationalism became then part of the national liberation ideologies that are allied to the Soviets in their war against the capitalist forces. And Israel, or Zionism, became a tool of the capitalist world domination in order to subjugate the Middle East. That was the perspective that the Soviets specifically crafted. and basically the theoretical view that was then imposed structurally in the understanding of the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially on leftist circles. Now, this conflict continued the way it is till 1967. What happens in 1967? The Six-Day War. The Six-Day War was basically a major defeat for whom? For the Arabs. But when you say the Arabs, are all the Arabs? We're talking about a very specific kind of Arabs. The Arab nationalists. It was a major defeat. The entire conflict with Israel was about Arab nationalism. It was Arab nationalism proving its supremacy, its authenticity as the true historical representation of the Arab spirit. And it got defeated. What did that do to Arab nationalism? It delegitimated it immediately. Right? That meant it's not true. Out of the collapse of Arab nationalism, what you get is fragmentation. Right? And you had these societies that were mesmerized by the radio, by promises of victory, promises of historical inevitabilities, a historical realization, historical triumph, and all of a sudden you have this humiliating defeat, you get fragmentation. And out of that fragmentation you get the Palestinian national movement that emerges really out of the wreckage of Arab nationalism and really veers more to the left away from the mystical nationalism of Arab nationalism, and then you get Islamism. Now, Islamism starts rising really, truly in the 1970s. How much time do I have left?
About 30 minutes.
30 minutes. I'm going to try to do this very quickly and then to take Q&A. So here we're talking about a society. We're talking about a revolutionized society. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about my family, right? They were in the countryside. They knew nothing about the world. Think about a peasant living in medieval conditions. All of a sudden, you take them and you throw them right in a city with roads and infrastructure and jobs and school systems and careers and TV and all of this, right? And that entry was through Arab nationalism, right? So the beginning of their understanding of the modern world is revolutionary, anti-Western, right? Anti-Semitic, and based on the idea that realization, there's something called historical realization, that happens through struggle. We struggle. History is a struggle between forces that are antagonistic that you have to overcome in order to represent yourself or in order to realize yourself. That population, then the leadership of Arab nationalism collapses, and then you start having alternative ideologies out of the wreckage. It's not like they are not going to start from a blank slate, right? They are starting from the wreckage that Arab nationalism left. And then you start getting people saying, well, maybe we should go back. You know, Arab nationalism took us from our roots, from our authenticity, from who we really are. Well, who are we really? What were we before Arab nationalism? Well, we were Muslim. We should go back to Islam. Okay, I just explained to you a very long historical perspective that I focused on the innovation of ideas and the radical changes of ideas that that ideas do in people's lives. Is there anything called going back? Based on what I told you, is it even possible to go back to anything in time? You can't go back. Go back to what? Now you're talking about rights and progress and virtue and freedom. How are you going to erase these ideas from your head? Right? These ideas, once you start thinking about the world in that way, it's done. It's over. It's really hard. You're not going to be able to go back to anything. There is no going back. Going back is fiction. But that's how it was said. We're going to go back. Okay, what are we going to go back to? We're going to go back to Islam. Why Islam? Because only Islam can, listen to this, fulfill our aspiration in the revolution and destroy Zionism and liberate us from the West. So the program that Islam inherited was established by, you see what I mean? It was established by that fusion of Arab nationalism and Marxism. But basically, the Islamists inherited the same program because that's what everybody was programmed to think. That those are the historical goals that we should achieve. We should destroy Zionism. We should liberate ourselves from Western domination. And we should achieve the revolution in terms of abstract sense of social justice, absolute freedom, and so on. That program, that meeting, was first realized in 1979 in Iran. That's when you get the Iranian revolution. The Iranian Revolution is basically that major hybrid of all of these confluences together, right? The Iranian, if you actually go and look at the official ideology of the Iranian Revolution, remove the vestige of Islamic symbolism, do you know what you get? You get Marx and Rousseau. You get that the world is made of only two forces and two forces only: oppressor and oppressed. Right? That's really, really what you get. So you have these Islamic forces rising organically from societies, inheriting the objective of these revolutionary programs, but interpreting it through traditional Islamic terminology and starting to recruit people from the street. This is when you get Iran, you get Hezbollah, and you get Hamas. It's important. Why was it important for me to tell all of you that? So you know that when the leftist radical professor says that Hamas is a progressive force, it's not entirely insanity. It's not insanity. It's actually, there are bases to what he's saying. If you understand the philosophical assumptions of the left, at least certain parts of the left, how they see the world and what they want to achieve, of course Hamas is progressive by the virtue of being anti-Zionist and anti-Western and anti-American, right? If you understand this. So anyways, you have Islamists arising, and then you have Palestinian nationalism also rising at the same time. They definitely inherited a lot of these parts as well, despite being in different amalgamation. The Palestinian nationalism, when it first emerged in 1976, or individuated, let's say, out of the wreckage of Arab nationalism, 1976, 1967, 1968, it took a very sharp turn towards Marxism, so it became very Marxist and Maoist for some time. And then with the rise of Islam in the late 70s, it started also a lot of parts of it to get Islamized, and that's when you get Hamas, you get the Islamic resistance, and so on and so forth. Now, before I finish and start listening to your question, there's a pivot here that I just mentioned. A lot of things happened around it. 1967, right? Why? Why? The war, right? The failure of Arab nationalism. Failure of Arab nationalism, the defeat of the Arabs. What else happened in 1967? Remember that the story that I told you from the beginning is very global. I'm talking about ideas of modernity, the Enlightenment, virtue, progress, European philosophers. So let's think about the entire story globally. What happened in 1967, 1968? There's something big happened here that we're still living in. The Cultural Revolution, right? And the sexual revolution, but it was part of a cultural revolution and the rise of a new global intellectual Western force, the New Left, right? The New Left basically was another revolution against the authority of even the old revolution. You had forces that's called the New Left that rose in Western Academy specifically that revolted not just against established authority of capitalist society, religion, the church, but even against traditional Marxism itself. Even against the authority of the Soviet Union. And they established new various forms of revolutionary thought. Of course, I'm not going to go into that, but I want to ask you, I want to leave you with the question. Could it be also that what happened in the Middle East after 1967 also was influenced by these global trends? The rise of revolution against the original revolution. Remember that Islamism and Palestinian nationalism became a revolutionary forces against the Arab nationalists. So it was a revolution against the original revolution. Did that somehow also, doesn't that fit in what was happening globally as well? Right? The collapse of meta-narrative. Well, what is Arab nationalism if what meta-narrative? And the breakdown of things. What about the rise of Islam? What about the return to authenticity? The obsession of going back to the roots. Identity. Who we really are. The question of identity is tearing this country apart. Think about that. Right now, as we speak. And if you look at any people who talk about the origin of these issues, they go back to there. They go back to the New Left, the 1960s. That's when identity politics roughly started. Is the rise of Islamism, the obsession in the Middle East with going back to identity, does it have anything to do with the Western University? Maybe. Anyways, I'm sorry. I tried to do my best in order to fit as much as possible in a short time. Thank you very much. Please, any questions that you have, I'll be more happy.